Well, we're almost at closing, which is good. We have one more topic to talk about, and that's how environments shape us. I guess it's shaping personality. That's what I found when I was trying to search. Actually, when I was trying to look up for programming and environment, it brought me into like coding. I'm like, no, I want to talk about personalities, programming, environment, and it brought up like coding personality. I'm like, what are you doing? It's so hard to, and this touched on the last podcast we
I could
had.
tell you what I looked up to find it.
No, I'm just telling you like the process when I tell you the algorithm hinders like actual research. This is what I mean. Like you have to
Oh, I
be
searched it incognito.
not it's not even that because even that doesn't help. It'll still bring
Oh,
you
I
things
see.
that it thinks that you want to look at, and you have to be
Oh,
extremely
I see.
specific in what you're looking for. And even then, it doesn't really work.
Well, what I typed in was, is it possible to resist social programming?
Mm-hmm.
Because before I did type in programming, I typed in, is it possible to resist programming? And
Mm-hmm.
then it just gave me a heap of stuff about SAS. And I was like, this would have been good if I was at work. But this is not what I need.
Oh man.
It was like how to code for yeah, like logistical stuff. I'm like, I guess I see it, how to resist, but no.
What do you find on that?
Man, I found a bunch of stuff, dude. So one thing I found, I'll quote this one.
Mm-hmm.
They were saying, I actually wanted to talk more about the consent thing, by the way, but we already moved on, so it's okay. But they're saying that research shows that a series of experiments concluded that when people didn't have a strong opinion about a choice presented to them, they simply mimicked the people around them. Rather than asking questions or spending time learning about something,
Mm-hmm.
people just defer to the social default.
Gotcha.
So, what that, to me, how I interpreted that is like when I grew up, the social default is you're a Christian, you go to church, and you believe in what people believe in.
Yeah.
And you grow up and you keep that and you just go with that for the rest of your life. That's the social default.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have people who question that and may or may not change their opinion. And so that's them resisting the programming. And that's how kind of like I viewed it. Like the resisting programming is basically, regardless of if you still conclude the same thing or not,
Yeah.
is you actually digging in and trying to make sure that what you believe or agree with makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then that brings up other issues such as biases and logical fallacies and all these other things that still play into it. Because oftentimes I feel like people still conclude things incorrectly, and that might just be my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
but conclude things incorrectly because they didn't account for a bias or didn't account for a logical fallacy,
I could see
and then
that.
they still make the same conclusion.
Yeah. So the thing that stood out to me was that studies found that environment accounts for 50 to 70% of your personality. And that's a lot.
That's a
But
lot.
but even in that, people in the same environments could have different outcomes. So that's positive. Like people grow up in the same house, but within that one environment, you have different interactions with the world that can change you, like different teachers, different friends, and this all
Yeah.
can affect you as well. So even though it's like almost most of it, there are other small parts that can play a big role as well. So I feel like the number is decent, but it's almost arbitrary because other things can have a bigger impact than your environment. Because there's also the genetic and biological aspect of programming as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that that kind of confirms what I thought, which is that social programming has a big effect. Because when I was thinking of this question,
Mm-hmm.
what I was thinking about was, colorism and all these other things that we still do today that started since back then
Mm-hmm.
and why. Like we know it's an issue. It's not like, I mean, most of us know it's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we don't know, but yet we still play into it.
Yeah.
And why? Like, is it really that hard to resist?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it is.
Yeah. So they point out three different scenarios that would affect your programming. So your work is too far away from your desk, causing you to procrastinate on getting started. The plates you use at dinner have a wider area, so you tend to fill them with more food than you need. You browse a
Mm,
website and see a suggested article or video, which you become curious about and then click on. And these are all things that kind of program us to do certain things. So it's
yeah.
in our best interest to put forth things in place that would go against these programming. So, like for the first one, have your work and yourself close together so you don't have a chance to say, I'll get to it. Use smaller plates when you eat, and then I guess not click on articles that interest you.
That reminds me of the remember we had the conversation about social media and how it like the algorithm makes
Mm-hmm.
you get addicted and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who basically created a program so that he would stop using Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that reminded me of.
Yeah. Actively fighting programming.
Yeah, but how do you actively fight programming when it's like racism and colorism?
I feel like the question is, how do you fight it when you don't know what you're fighting? I think that's the bigger problem there. Because
Mm.
growing up, you don't necessarily know what is happening is racist until you're too old to actually say like you knew what's going on.
I think I actually have a solution.
Okay, go ahead.
So I work in public health,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes I think of solutions based on what I know in public health. So in public health, we have these things called community-based interventions. Oh, sorry, that's not where I want to go. That is the solution, but where I want to go with this was I think a lot of things in America can be handled with a public health approach,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically you identify a problem that you could fix. You take a bigger problem, you break it down to smaller things that you could fix, right? You find a solution for that smaller thing, you
Mm-hmm.
implement it, you track it so you could keep tabs on like, is it working or not? You know, that's where all your research will come from and your published papers and stuff will come from. If it's not working, you try the next thing. If it is working, you tweak it or you keep like you do things to improve it if it is working.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but basically, what I would propose is a community-based intervention thing, but for the whole country,
Mm-hmm.
where you basically implement some kind of education or some kind of maybe even advertising, because
Mm-hmm.
advertising is a big way to manipulate people.
Yeah.
Um, Even our media, movies, instead of always showing the lighter skinned person as a savior, show some dark skinned people, stuff like that. Just basically implement these things, track how it's if it's having any effect on society, and then adjust as we go and just keep doing that incrementally over time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think there's currently a framework that's like actively doing this. I think like it's kind of more like a helter skelter of things happening all at once.
Yeah.
And it just happens to be trending in that direction. But
Mm-hmm.
if we actually did it like as a scientific way, step by step, instead of like just random, I think it'll probably have faster results.
I can agree with that. I feel like there's enough people who have the knowledge to do this to make it work. And it's just getting the public to actually accept it. Because if you're not reaching the people that you need to reach, then I wouldn't say that it's a waste of time, but it's like if everybody that's for it is doing it, then it's nothing's really changing from what we have now. You need to get the people
Yeah.
who are on the other end of the spectrum from you to actually see what you're talking about and actually not understand, but like respect where you're coming from enough to actually listen to you. And I feel like that's gonna be always the main roadblock to change is like some people are so stuck in their ways and in their thoughts that they don't even want to think about the other side or the other viewpoint of views.
Yeah. And that's like shit, I had something I wanted to say, but I lost my train of thought. But in terms of people being on the other side, I think that that's what I'm gonna say. We actually need to start with the politicians or our system that we have in place. We need better leadership in America, period. Like after Obama, I ain't gonna lie, I mean, even before Obama, we kind of been like up and down. But I
Mhm,
feel like now we just like trending down in leadership. Like
mhm,
the leadership that we don't hold our leaders accountable as much as we used to.
mhm,
Um, the qualifications aren't as good as they used to be. Um, just it seems like for a long time in America, even before now,
mhm.
only the rich have been in charge, which is a problem. How are
Yeah,
you going to speak for people when you don't have the same experiences as them?
yeah.
You can't. The majority of Americans aren't rich.
Mhm,
Matter of fact, the divide between rich and poor, rich and middle class, and all of that is getting wider and wider. There's no way these rich people understand how people who are middle class, poor, etc., feel or
yeah.
what they need. And then on top of that, they refuse to listen to experts.
Mhm,
And I think that's the big problem there. I wouldn't have a problem with the rich continuing to rule
mhm.
if they would at least listen to experts in the fields, telling
Yeah.
them like, hey, this is what you should do.
Mhm.
Even if you listen to like a body of experts, because you might not want to listen to just one expert or two
Yeah.
because they might be biased towards one thing.
Mhm.
But if you have a body of experts from different political standings telling you similar things, or they could agree on one thing because they can't agree,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you listen to them? Or like, why wouldn't you do that? Like, I just think in general, we need to, in all levels of society, we need to be more scientifically minded. I mean,
Some
it's not like a cure all or like the perfect thing, but it at least standardizes stuff so that we could keep track of what's going on.
yeah, I think my response to that is that's a great point because I feel like from our walk of life, we're more science based. And we've seen that science has taken a backseat to almost everything right now. So to add to that, so it's not necessarily purely science, there needs to be a panel of just different different panels of different specializations. So like a panel of psychologists telling you the psychology of the laws you're gonna put into place. People on the science side telling you the scientific ramifications of things that you're gonna put into place. Economists telling you how the money's gonna affect people, and then they work together to tell you how each different thing affects each other. So then you have like a mind basically working together without just the greed and like looking away from everything and just doing what you think is right. Which I think there might be something like that into place, but I'm not sure. Not like bodies, but it's like people. And I think people is the problem. It can't just be one person telling you their story because of course it'll be biased.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of back in the days when you had the king, and
Mhm.
then he would have his senators
Mhm.
telling him like, "Hey, you should do this or this or this. This is going to help the country or the
Mhm.
kingdom flourish." But I guess even within that, there's room for politics to start to affect things
Yeah.
because you're going to have some experts who are going to be more respected than others. So
Mhm.
then their opinion is going to have a bigger weight than other people.
Yeah.
So nothing is going to be perfect, but our
What
current system just isn't good, in my
what
opinion.
if it was like a almost unanimous advice from these experts?
If it's almost unanimous, then I would say sure, but then it's still a question of, well, is the person with the biggest influence impacting everybody else's choice?
Mm.
I mean, that's always going to be a potential issue.
Wait, I didn't mean unanimous. I meant anonymous.
Oh, like you can't tell who said what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That could work too, as long as you verify beforehand that everybody is actually an
Well,
expert
I
and
mean,
is not.
you have your experts, and then these experts give you anonymous advice on their specific fields.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that could work, but I still think that there's still room for politics.
Mm.
Like someone might go behind the scenes and talk to everybody, like get them on board with their view.
Yeah,
So
that's
then even if
always
they
gonna be
vote
there.
anonymous, yeah,
Yeah.
it's always going to be potential because humans, that's just human nature.
Dude, this is making me think of my one thing in life I don't like. Well, it's one of many things, reality TV. Because it's used to portray us in a bad way mostly. But then there's certain shows I look at in reality TV that actually bring forth human nature and human interactions. Because there's a show called The Challenge that is people from different reality TV shows competing against each other in like physical activities. But normally the winner of these shows isn't the one that's the most physical or the most able to do the task. It's actually the one that can get everybody to be on their side and not vote them out. So it's like
Hmm.
you can be good in the challenge part where you're doing the athletic stuff, but then you also have to be good in the house to get everybody to not vote for you. And that's what you said made me think about. So like even though you have anonymous offering of information, you can still go behind the scenes and try to sway people with whatever they need and try to like, bribe them or whatever.
Yeah. Do you? So somebody said something in chat. I don't know if you want to speak on it. But if you're not going to speak on it, I want to say something else.
Um I've always felt like that would be a good idea because as I said, science, at least in my opinion, has taken a back burner. Well, not saying that it needs to be in the forefront, but there are scientific issues that I feel aren't being looked at with the right spectacles because of who's looking at it.
Yeah, I would say my only contention to what they said in chat is that I do think that it would be ideal, or maybe not ideal, but it would be good. But the problem is the money. So in politics, that's the reason why it's usually only been rich people being able to get into office is because it requires so much money. And you need to be able to gather money from people, and it's usually easier to gather money from other rich people. And the only way to gather money from rich people is usually to be in their circles already.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very unlikely for us to have just a regular mm, rocket scientist or whatever in office.
Yeah.
So
But I feel like
that's the only
even
problem.
if they were to get into office, there would be so much that they would have to know besides rocket science.
That's true.
Yeah. So
Like that's why I kind of like Obama was a lawyer, so he understood the law and stuff like that, at least in his state.
mm-hmm,
Um, but I feel like every president should have some kind of experience with something
mm-hmm,
related to society. Like an economist would potentially make a good president, for example.
mm-hmm,
A lawyer. Like I don't see a doctor being necessarily a good president because I mean, unless maybe a public health person may be a good president,
mm-hmm.
but like actual MD, maybe not, because public health is more of a population-based science, whereas MD is more of an individual-based thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I can see certain scientific fields being good presidential candidates, but I don't necessarily think just because you have a scientific background, you would be a good candidate simply because of what you just said.
Yeah.